Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. This is the programme where you can have your property-related questions answered by a team of property experts. I'm Stephen Galpin and joining me today are Joanna Leggett. Hello Joanna, co-founder of Leggett Immobilier in France. Welcome to you. Second, we have Ranjan Bhattacharya, who is a commercial property investor and founder of succeedingproperty.com. And finally, Tom Balashev, founder of Montague Property International. Welcome to you, Tom. Okay, Joanna, we're going to go to you for the first question. And that question is, I've been considering trying to build a property of my dreams in France, preferably very near the coast. The problem is not knowing how to find the land. Can any organisation in France assist in that? Are there magazines or websites that this development land is for sale on?
Well, I'm presuming by the question it's just for a personal home, in which case any agency, estate agency in France, will have land for sale. There are some specific land agencies that deal specifically with land, but they're generally for commercial properties. So if it's for a general home, what I would do, go on Google, for example, land for sale in the Charente, and every agency that has land for sale will come up on that. Then I would try to maybe do a recce trip and go and meet the agents, speak to the agents, tell them exactly what they're looking for. I'd be very careful with buying from privately, and if you are going to buy privately, I would definitely use a solicitor, because a lot of farmers or whatever will say, oh yes, you can build there, of course you can, and of course when you go to apply for planning permission you won't get it. Usually the estate agents will have already gone through that process. The land will have a CU, which is a certificate of urbanisation, which means it can be used for building. And I would definitely do research, because in certain areas there's a lot of grants that you can get. France is very green, so anything type eco, there are a lot of grants that you'll be able to apply for when building a house as well.
Okay, and is the planning process complex in France, more complex than here perhaps?
Not really, it depends. For new builds it's quite straightforward, very similar to the UK. If the land has already been granted planning permission, then that's quite straightforward. If you're looking at buying a plot of land and applying for planning permission, that can be quite difficult, but there, you can go to the local mayors. The mayors will have a thing called a plan de sol, which is a sort of environment plan of the whole area, and it will show the zones that are going to become available for planning that might not be now, but that plan is set for 10 years, so if it's not on the plan it's never going to get permission.
Okay. Tom, any more on that?
Yeah, I was just listening. I'm going to add another question which I'm curious about. So say, for example, an individual is looking to buy in France. One of the things that we've had feedback when we've dealt with clients is that sometimes it's quite murky on the value of a property. It's not as easy to ascertain a property's true value. What would someone do to protect themselves there?
For a new build, you mean? Or?
Yeah, like the value of the land. How do they know the price they're going to pay is not an inflated price?
Well, you can go on the Notaire de France website. That will give you, which is just notaires.fr, saying it in French now, that will tell you exactly every single plot of land that's been sold in the area and the square meterage cost. So if you see a plot, go on there, check what's been sold in the area, check, a solicitor could do this or the estate agent could do that for you. You'll be able to see what other pieces of land in the same area are sold for, so it's either inflated or you're getting a bargain. But that Notaires de France registers every single sale in France, and that's the only place where you can find that information.
Ranjan, your question. Could someone explain exactly how to set about successfully sourcing commercial properties that could be turned into residential developments? There doesn't seem to be anything on the internet search engines to help this.
This is a great question, because it's one of my stock answers, because everyone expects everything to be available on the internet and it simply is not. The reason why there is a lot of money to be made in converting commercial buildings into residential use is because not everyone knows all the angles and possibilities that are out there. And one of the reasons why not everyone knows about them is because there are just so many permitted development rights that the government have given people. Permitted development rights are rights to convert or redevelop a building without going through a formal planning application. And there are almost a few new permitted development rights issued every quarter now, because the commercial landscape is going through a massive period of transition, as the way business is being done is making a lot of commercial buildings defunct. So the government is encouraging their repurposing. So there is no website for it. What people have got to do is go out there and get themselves educated about the permitted development rights that are coming on. And what I always find is this: when the government announces a permitted development right, for example, there was a right to convert the space above a shop into 2 flats. It takes a good year after the permitted right is granted for mainstream people to kind of get wind of it.
To pick it up.
Yeah. And in that year, you can really make hay. I mean, even going to commercial property auctions, we've regularly bought property at auction and we've won because not everyone have figured out all the different permitted development rights and how they can be applied. So there is no site out there, but that shouldn't be a discouragement. That's why there is tremendous opportunity.
Ranjan, just on a sort of simple point that you brought up there, some years ago it would be virtually impossible to change commercial property into residential property because the government would say, or the local authority would say, no, it's going to hamper employment, it's going to, cause problems in that area. Has that attitude now really changed?
Well, that attitude has changed in that the government has given permitted development rights which allow developers to find opportunity that meet the sort of template of the permitted development right and do it. So, for example, if you find a shop which isn't in a primary shopping parade, there are circumstances where you can convert either part of the shop or the whole shop into residential use, as well as convert the upper floors into flats. There's a forthcoming right which is talked about, because often they go through white paper stage and discussion stage, to allow the adding of an extra floor above these sort of units to be permitted development rights too. And with Boris at the helm now, he has given every indication that he's going to kind of encourage as much development as possible, so as to stimulate the economy, etc. So when that right comes into being, we're going to see the same thing. It'll take several months, if not a year or so, before the mainstream fully understands what you can do with that right. The same thing happened a few years ago with office to residential conversion. 2013 it was announced. It was really, wasn't until 2015, 2016 did everyone know about it, and then vendors started pricing it into their to their selling proposition.
Yeah.
But 2014 you had a field day.
Yeah. Tom?
One of the things I don't want anyone to watch this and kind of overlook is that Ranjan has an enormous amount of specialised knowledge. So don't just venture into these things without having a good team around you. But there's one little tip that isn't necessarily, can't find the information on Google so easily. What you can find on Google is a lot of companies out there that charge a very, very nominal fee to assess a site and give you its chance of changing the use in order to obviously.
Yes. Well, that issue comes up on Property Question Time all the time, and it's called getting a good team around you.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? Joanna, anything to add?
Not really. I mean, in France, rural locations, it's very, very easy because the buildings are going to collapse and fall down and nobody's going to run a business there. So the local mayor would prefer to have the tax and will give the permission. In cities, it's very difficult. So it'd be very similar. You'd need to get a really good team.
It'd be quite interesting to see how this affects our high streets, won't it? Whether we start going back to some residential on high streets and that sort of thing.
It's already happening.
It is happening to a degree,
I mean,
isn't
we've
it?
seen. One of the things we all know about the BHS collapse, and a lot of those stores have been repurposed simply by knocking them down and doing alternative schemes. And most of the schemes that I've seen for particularly BHS stores have been mixed use. So they've involved commercial on lower floors with residential above.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the last shows on Oxford Street, just a stone's throw from Topshop is a new building that's co-living. It's going to have about 13, 14 flats in there.
Yeah. Well, of course, and the changeover of the big buildings at the far end of Oxford Street to residential, quite important and quite dramatic conversions. But there we are. Tom, your question. How do first-time investors in overseas properties get to hear about opportunities in other parts of the world?
Yeah, it's a popular question. Maybe I should set up a company that
Yes.
gives you that
Perhaps
solution.
we should have a whole half-hour show on it. Yeah.
100%. I think, with the greatest respect to the person that's asked the question, you can't be lazy. You can't just sit in your home, have a cup of tea and expect these properties to just jump out on the telly or off the laptop and suddenly you know where's the best place to buy. It's the best way to look at it is to think, what do you want? Do you want a fishing sea lifestyle? Then you can focus to coastal towns. Do you want a golfing lifestyle? Do you want a large expat community? Make a big list of all of the things that are massive requirements for you to live somewhere, and that's going to immediately narrow your search. And then from there, you could just Google the area, where's the best place to live in X? How much is the house price in so-and-so? And that's your starting point. And then what we've said before in other questions, take some trips out there, familiarise yourself with the area, what you think is a great area. After maybe 1 or 2 trips, you think, actually, this isn't for me, and you choose somewhere else. So yeah, you can't get the result by sitting on your backside.
Okay. Joanna, in 20 seconds, anything to add?
Well, just also to check the statistics, because you can look at areas that are going on the up. I mean, France has been pretty stable for maybe 8 years, but now all the property prices are going up, some more than others. So again, look at what's selling in what areas, and then you'll know which areas are good for investment.
Join us after the break. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time. Welcome back to you, Joe, Ranjan and Tom. Joanna, your second question. How easy is it to negotiate down the price of property in France? Would it be done through an agent like it is in the UK, or is the process totally different?
No, the process is the same anywhere in the world, I believe, for negotiating the price. I would use an agent, because the agent will know the vendor's situation. For example, in France, a lot of properties are passed down to the children. So there could be 9 children that all have to agree. So it really depends. The agent will have to negotiate with all of those. There are a lot of inheritance properties that people might want to sell very quickly. They might have issues, they might be moving back to the UK, etc. And the agent will know those circumstances and know, what is a good offer and what is not a good offer. Generally speaking, all properties have offers on them in France. They don't generally pay asking price, unless you're somewhere like the Alps, for example, where you might have 2 bidders and they'll go over the asking price. But in the rural countryside, where most Brits buy, in rural locations and holiday locations, they are open to offers. But you have to be very careful with the French, because if you put in too low an offer and they're insulted, they won't sell it to you whatever price you come back with.
Right, okay. So, negative territory.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Anything to add to that, Ranjan?
I think negotiation is really about human psychology, and there's obviously a lot of similarities. There are a few cultural differences, but there's a lot of similarities wherever you are in the world. But I think that when you're doing property negotiation, it is a good idea to have someone in the middle. And their job title is the negotiator, which kind of is a clue as to why they're useful. And that's a good buffer point to have.
And they're not emotionally involved,
Exactly.
whereas the buyer and the seller are, so the in-between.
Yes. But of course, if you do get the situation where somebody's a little bit offended, then of course the agent can always put that right.
Yes, of course.
That's the beauty of a third party. Tom?
It sounds to me, just reading between the lines, it's also a question of trust. It seems this individual wants to ensure that how can they ensure that they're getting the best value, and that's about trusting the agent you're with. That's about doing your research, which we always talk about on this show, making sure because I don't know if it's always the case in France, but a lot of the properties that we deal with overseas will be listed with multiple agents. So as is in the case in the UK, so choose someone that you believe is going to deliver on what you want, and then you'll feel a lot more comfortable going into the negotiations.
Yes, and of course that agent will have the benefit of absolute local knowledge, which can also be important. The context in which the property is being sold, why it's being sold, what the family circumstances are. It can all help, can't it? Ranjan?
Well, nothing to add really. I think it's been covered.
Okay.
That's a good point from Tom.
Good. Ranjan, then we'll move on to your question. What should I know before buying a property with an existing residential tenant on the top 2 floors and a commercial shop tenant on the ground floor?
Yes, I mean, this is a very common thing. It's all about what due diligence and basically the checklist of things to look for if you're buying a shop with upper parts as residential. Starting with a shop, you've got to, starting with the whole thing, you've got to make sure that what you're buying you're getting what it says on the tin. So if, let's say the shop is rented out for £20,000, you've got to make sure, one, that is actually the rent received is £20,000 per annum. Sometimes with commercial properties, landlords let them on a rent-free period. So it might be subject to the first 12 months being rent-free and the £20,000 kicking in. So if you're buying it 6 months into the lease, you want to know when the actual, whether there's a rent-free period still in, and when you're actually going to start receiving that commercial rent. And you want to make sure that there are no arrears, and whether there have been any breaches in the lease obligations for that commercial property. With the residential property, I think has got far more complicated these days, because with ASTs, there's a whole bunch of regulation now, and which means that your paperwork has got to be in order if you're going to effectively serve notice at the end of the tenancy. So you need to know whether, when the AST was granted, whether the tenancy deposit was properly registered, whether it had a valid EPC, whether gas safety and all this stuff was given to the tenant at the time. So you've got to make sure that when that AST was granted, it was all done properly, because you may not be able to get possession from that tenant if it has not been. So again, a lot of checking.
Interesting point there. The government are talking now about doing away with the automatic reclaim of property on Section 21 notices. I think a lot of people are panicking at the moment that it's already in. In actual fact, it's not, I understand. But what do you think the government logic is there?
I think, well, who knows what government logic is, but I think there has been a shift over time. I mean, when Margaret Thatcher was in power, she famously used the phrase, Britain is a home-owning democracy. And since Margaret Thatcher, the tenant base has risen substantially, and tenants are voters.
But it was that
persuasion.
government that brought in the assured short-hold tenancy.
Yes, it was.
To encourage landlords to come into the market.
Yes, but it's, what I'm saying is it's swung the other way.
Yeah.
There are more renters out there. Their voting interests have to be catered for. And I think the Section 21, I mean, because Jeremy Corbyn was all out there with very anti-landlord stuff, I think under Theresa May, there was a tendency to try to outdo Jeremy Corbyn on tenant-friendly legislation. Hopefully, things may change, because we seem to have a much more business-friendly cabinet now.
Well, let us hope so. But again, you know, same thing. We're now going to be on our 9th housing minister in 8 years.
Yes.
It's very difficult to see how you get sort of coordinated programmes over the years.
I think people also need to take in, they need to look at like the bigger picture, is that it's difficult for a lot of individuals to get on the housing ladder, versus 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was a completely different story. So nowadays someone can go and have a significant amount of money, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds, and not be able to buy in London. So they're forced into renting, and there's this overwhelming feeling, I think we'll adopt more of a European model, where renters need to have a lot more rights.
Well, that's all very well, Tom, but if you create, I mean, Margaret Thatcher, you won't remember because you're a young chap, but Margaret Thatcher...
I was there as I was 2 years old.
Well, there you go. So, look, Margaret Thatcher created these ASTs, or a government did, because up until that point, landlords would let out properties and you ended up with what they used to term as sitting tenants. You couldn't get your property back. So she thought, right, well, partly to alleviate the housing problem, putting these properties on the market with assured short-hold tenancies would ensure that the landlord could get their property back. And if they're private landlords, you've got to remember they're not institutions, so their personal circumstances may change. They may not be able to fund the mortgage anymore. It may not be convenient to own that property anymore. So the right to be able to get it back was quite important. Now, the government even today are saying, look, you know, rentals great contributory factor to getting the housing list down, you know, we've got to encourage it. And yet this government does seem to be going the other way. You've got pretty punitive tax laws now, which all the accountants are saying is a tax grab, this Section 24. So landlords are being hit on tax, they're being hit on available, you know.
But the thing I'm seeing is that property professionals or investors are already voting with their feet. The surge in interest I've seen in commercial property, buy-to-let, has been huge, and that is borne out by auction statistics and sales statistics over the recent years. Because all this regulation isn't there in the if you buy a commercial shop and you have a mortgage, no Section 24. You know, then the most commercial properties are still let out under an Act of Parliament set up in 1954, and it hasn't substantially been changed, because commercial leases are basically business agreements. There are no votes in making those sort of anti-landlords.
I think you just hit the nail on the head there, haven't you?
So I'm seeing established buy-to-let professionals have got portfolios of properties saying, I don't want to buy any more residential, I want to buy commercial.
There's some dangerous consequences to all this.
I mean, we're noticing that with a lot of the clients that we deal with that would have previously got into buy-to-lets for the purpose of an investment, just see it as a dead donkey and just don't want to be involved at all. So they're looking into other areas.
The Section 24 tax grab, I mean, is actually putting some private landlords into negative cash flow.
Oh, it's a
doubt.
criminal
Worse,
almost.
of course.
Yeah.
We haven't had it all yet.
No.
It's tapered.
All right, Tom, your last question. When someone employs a property sourcing company or a finder, what are the normal fee arrangements? Does the finder get paid commission by the seller, or does this vary?
Usually, such a general rule, but 2% is usually the number. In more competitive markets like London, for example, we deal with a lot of commercial agents where there are lots of situations, which is going to sound strange to people listening, where they'll sell the property first and talk about the fee after. The key is just to try and secure that deal because it's such a competitive industry. And I've dealt with people where the fees have gone as low as, on big buildings, have gone as low as like 0.5%. So if someone is looking to hire someone, then a typical standard rate is 2% finder's fee or sourcing fee, whatever you want to call it. And then if you're in or have a property that has a lot of interest, then you actually hold all the cards and you can begin to probably knock that down. I think 1% would be a good deal if you were able to secure that.
Joanna?
Yeah, pretty much the same in France, but it would be the buyer that pays the fee in France, not the vendor. So generally speaking, you would get a property finder, you'd pay the property finder, but the property finder will go to all the agents, so you're still going to have to pay the agents' fees as well. Yeah. So if you've got the time, I'd go direct to the agents. Yeah.
So be careful, in other words. Okay. All right, ladies and gents, thank you very much for that. Thank you for your input. That's all we've got time for in this show. So Joanna Leggett, thank you very much indeed. Ranjan Bhattacharya, thank you very much. And Tom Balashev, thank you for coming on Property Question Time again. That's all we have time for now. So join us next time on Property Question Time.